City Sounds. Creating podcasts, creating podcasters.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Gold. This mini-series is a production from the MA Podcasting course at City St George's University. We've been hosting an evening of British Podcast Award Gold winners, and we'll be sharing some of their tips, ideas and inspiration and their thoughts about what the next big thing will be.
Hello, I'm Yaman Mohammed, a podcasting student at City St George's University of London. And in this episode, I interviewed Victoria Derbyshire. Victoria is an acclaimed journalist and broadcaster, known for her fearless approach to tough topics and her commitment to telling real human stories. But beyond her groundbreaking work at BBC Radio and Newsnight, she's ventured into the world of podcasting with And Then Came Breast Cancer, a series where she delves into some of life's most challenging experiences with her journey. In today's interview, we'll talk about her podcasting journey, produced by her own husband, Mark Sandell, and how it allowed them to connect with each other, but also connect with the listeners in a deeply personal way. We'll hear how this life-altering experience reshaped her perspective and fueled her drive to raise awareness and support for others facing similar challenges. As emotional as it was probably to tell the story, were you ever expecting that it would go as big as it did, or even win the award that it did?
No, absolutely no way. I mean, you don't. No, you know, the breast cancer community is a relatively small community, but there didn't seem to be a podcast out there, you know, particularly for people who'd been affected by breast cancer. So you just start and you kind of hope that some people will listen to it.
And how did you feel, Mark, being part of it and producing it?
Yes, we won a British Podcast Award 2 years ago for the Bullseye Award, which is an award given to a podcast that serves a small audience really well. So I think at that point, I thought we're on to something if we're doing well. But what's important about this year is that it's in the general well-being category when you're up against some amazing podcasts. So I think it was a very big deal. And obviously from the point of view of this podcast, we want to get to as many people who've been affected by breast cancer as possible. And winning an award like this obviously
raises
helps.
the profile.
Raises the profile.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it must have been fun and exciting, but also probably a bit maybe difficult in terms of telling the story, because it's one thing to experience it, but one thing to actually tell it on a microphone, especially when you're telling it to thousands of people. It's not the same as, of course, you know, reading the news or presenting a news program. Mm-hmm. So how did you guys tackle that? And did it impact? I'm sure I might have not done, but did it have any impacts on the relationship, positive or negative?
Our relationship?
Yeah.
Number one, it wasn't difficult to talk about because I'm a very open person and I wouldn't have agreed to it if I wasn't completely cool with that. I don't think it's affected our relationship in a certainly not in a detrimental way. Sometimes in a positive way, we will come out of a recording and we'll both go, "Oh my God, those guests were absolutely amazing," and that gives you a real kind of feeling of gratification. Honestly, sometimes a kind of high, an adrenaline buzz, because you think these guests have been so open that is going to help somebody else. That's how I felt anyway.
And I also think from the guest point of view, they're in a conversation with Victoria who has been through it, who understands what this is about, not a dispassionate presenter who does not understand the effect that breast cancer can have on not only the person going through it, but their family, their friends, their loved ones, etc. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's been easier to attract people to the podcast, because Victoria is hosting it and she knows what she's talking about.
How important do you think that is in general for podcasters? So like, if I want to make a podcast about a specific topic, do you think it would be 10 times more impactful if it's one that I've experienced?
Yes.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think, you know, obviously there are loads and loads of podcasts in loads of different niches. If you can talk to an audience from the experience of someone who understands what that audience is experiencing or may experience in the future. I mean, somebody was watching your videos. Victoria put some videos up about her breast cancer journey while she was being treated.
So way before the podcast.
Before the podcast. It inspired the podcast. And people were contacting Victoria and saying, "I'm just a few months behind you. I was diagnosed a few months after you and I'm now following your progress." Well, that's a lot more important than, say, me standing there and saying all the medical advice is this. It's much better from...
And also in terms of, not just the individual who's going through a diagnosis, but from Mark's point of view, being the partner of someone going through it, when it comes to talking to the guests and taking briefs from them, Mark knows what he's talking about because by proxy he went through it as well, sort of thing.
And it's like anything, you become, when something affects you, you become an expert on it because you need to be an expert on it really fast because it's something that hits your family out of the blue and you've got to go, right, I need to understand what the options are now. So I think that's also important.
And on the note of being experts on something, having won 2 British Podcast Awards now for this podcast, I would say that you guys are experts on making a award-winning podcast, and that's why you're here tonight. So what advice would you have to people like us, like me, students that are just starting out into this industry, one that's quite unknown? I mean, this course is only in its 2nd year. What would you say have been, the 3 mainly, let's say, biggest learning curves that you've had?
You go first.
Well, I would say that the key word for podcast is intimacy. You invite a podcast into your headphones, into your car, into your kitchen. So it's a conscious decision to bring it in. So use the intimacy of podcasting and decide. You were asking earlier if you were going to make a podcast and it was something to do with your lived experience. Then decide just how much of that you're going to share and what you feel comfortable about sharing. But it's a really honest medium because you've got the time to tell your story exactly how you want to tell it. No one's telling you to wind up because we're going to the news or the weather. So tell the story exactly as you want to tell it. And that's the beauty of it in a way.
From a presenter's perspective?
So I would say, from a host's perspective, I would say be a really good listener. Your guests are the most important thing. And it's not really about you, it's about them. Obviously, if you've experienced what they have experienced, you can share that, but it's mostly about the people who you have invited on. I would say know your stuff. It's respectful to your guests to know the subject. I would also say, if you don't know something, it's cool to say, I don't really understand that. What? What do you mean? And you can do that. You can do that on all sorts. You can do that on TV. You can do that on radio. You can certainly do it in a podcast form.
And I'm going to end it on a very cheeky question now, which is a bit devoid of podcasts, but we've got the one and only Victoria Derbyshire here, so I can't interview you without asking about Newsnight, if I may.
Yeah.
And as you're, of course, as everyone's aware, in recent months, Newsnight has faced some serious cuts to its production value, to its whole format and how the way the program works.
The budget was slashed in half.
The budget was slashed in half. For a lot of young journalists, this has been disheartening because they can see a program which has been loved by many people. I mean, for me, like I wasn't born here. When I came to the UK, it was one of my first sort of insights into how a news program should be and to understand current affairs in the country that I live in. Do you think that young journalists saw that as a disheartening moment in the future of the way journalism goes for, the biggest public broadcaster to cut one of its main programs in the way that it did? What's your message to those young journalists that are afraid?
I would say don't be afraid. I would say times change. I would say in broadcasting, everybody is cutting back. I would say on Newsnight, we continue to break stories. We continue to hold power to account, which is one of the key tenets of Newsnight. I would say we do robust journalism, perhaps in a slightly different way. Yeah, we don't do long films. Yeah, we don't do those film investigations. We are a journalistic program, first and foremost, and we continue to be. And I would point to the fact that the audience figures have gone up since the changes. I don't know why, but that tells you something.
This has been a production from the MA Podcasting course at City St George's University.